This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And welcome in, folks, to the 100th edition of Open Mic Night. I am your host, Noah Taluki, and on today's episode, we have a very special guest. He's familiar with the podcast, a friend of the program, was on for episode number 1, and I felt it was fitting that he would be on for episode number 100. It is Mr. Matt Dery, host of the Locked On Lions podcast, also the Pistons team podcast as well. Matt, good to have you on again. It's been a while since we've talked, but glad you were able to join us for the 100th episode.
No, it's an honor to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Great to see you and talk to you today, no doubt.
I think the last time we talked was mid-season of Lions last year.
I believe you're right.
Year one of Dan Campbell. How much things have changed since then, for sure. But we're gonna dive right into the Lions. Actually, I want to know your thoughts about this draft back in April with some of these really high-profile names like Aiden Hutchinson, Jameson Williams, among others. And what are you looking most forward to with this team entering training camp in a few weeks?
Well, like you said, Noah, everybody is really excited, and I got to be honest. There's a lot of times, and you and I have spoken many times. I know you've been at training camp, and you've talked about your excitement level, and I've had to knock you down a peg as a mentor to you and say, Noah, don't get too excited. It's the Lions. But to be quite honest, right now they're in a really good spot. They're not going to, I don't think, going to make a playoff run or anything in year 2 of a rebuild. But what's exciting is the division seems to be regressing. Teams like Minnesota and Chicago look to be taking a step back. Green Bay no longer with Devontae Adams, although I still think they're very good. And their draft, especially on the defensive side of the ball, was really good. So they're going to be fine. But the Lions have a chance to move up a little bit. The schedule's softer. Now everybody from the coaching staff is back. There's some consistency here. Everybody but one, obviously. But, you know, I think that I think they're on the right track. And again, if Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes are allowed to do their thing, if certain individuals and certain folks at the very top stay out of the way, let them do their job, let this process play out, and they decide on a couple of key positions, including quarterback. Let's find out this year if Jared Goff's the guy or not, obviously. Put the players in the best possible spots to be successful. I think this team can double their win total from last year and show some signs of life, and that's exciting.
How about some of those draft picks? I mean, are you high on those guys?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry. Aiden Hutchinson to me was a no-brainer for many different reasons. We're going to find out, this season, not that you can judge everything on one draft or one rookie year, but is Hutchinson, will Trayvon Walker be the guy in Jacksonville? Was that the home run pick at 1? What about Kayvon Thibodeau? And what about Hutchinson? So all those guys are kind of linked together. We're going to find out who, by week 17, who had the best rookie year. And, I don't think you can judge it on one season. But the thing that stands out for Hutchinson is he fits Detroit. He fits the Lions. He plays every snap. He plays every snap in practice hard. There's no questions about his motor, which is obviously something that has been questioned of Kayvon. And he's put up the numbers at college and a high level at Michigan and in the Big Ten, something that Trayvon Walker didn't do. So from that standpoint, I see it as being a good choice for the Lions. I'm not ready to call it a great pick yet. He's going to be on the billboards. We're going to see commercials coming up this month and in August about, get season tickets, and he's going to be on there because he's from here. He's a good-looking guy. He's the golden child, and they didn't have anybody to put on the billboards last year. You can't, DeAndre Swift was never healthy. They didn't really have a prototypical star wide receiver that you could promote. Hutchinson now is that guy. You throw Jameson Williams in the mix. I thought that was an aggressive move by Brad Holmes to go get the guy they thought was the best receiver in the draft, and they did it. And utilize the draft picks, the draft capital that they got from the Rams, and in making that move in the division with Minnesota. So I like the draft. I thought they did a good job.
You talk about the excitement for building for this team as well. I know you mentioned a little bit of Hard Knocks as well. Earlier this week at the Hall of Fame, I actually got to meet Chris Willis, who is one of the archivists at NFL Films, and he's at one of his projects he's actually working on is doing a lot more stuff with Hard Knocks for the Lions this year, and we talked a lot about it this week as well. But I just want to know from your end, what do you think? What do you think of this Hard Knocks coming for the Lions? And do you think it's going to just be a big distraction, or is this something that can then maybe help the Lions move into the national scene as well?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's going to get a chance to see what's going on at 222 Rod Wood Drive in Allen Parks, I like to call it. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm not worried about it. I've not spent a ton of time on it on my podcast every day talking about, it's a distraction, because I honestly think the Lions have some personalities and some guys that ham it up, no matter if there's a camera there or not. Jamal Williams is that kind of guy. Dan Campbell is that kind of guy. From what we've heard, there's some other players that are going to be stars on this show. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I guess, is going to be profiled. They're doing some stuff on his family right now and getting that ready and prepackaged for August. I don't think it's going to be a huge distraction. What controversy is there? What angle can they take controversial-wise that would be ratcheted up? I don't see one, at least at the moment. I mean, something could happen on the show. You never know. But I think this stuff gets nipped in the bud because of the amount of respect the players have for the coach, the decisions that he and his staff make. The players seem to be in lockstep and going with them. I think it'll be fun. I don't think it'll be controversial. I think that's okay. The Lions were destined to be on this show. The Lions and the city of Detroit wanted that draft in a few years. And from what I understand, they had to give in, be on this show in order to get that draft. And that's exactly what they did. There's no secret that the day that they announced that they were on Hard Knocks, 3 hours later, it was announced they were getting the 2024 draft. That's, they probably went hand in hand. So they're ready. They're prepared. The previous regime, Quinn and Patricia, wanted no business being on this show. They denied it every time they were asked. But now the Lions, came down to them and Carolina and one other team, I think the Giants or the Jets, and they said, okay. So they're ready for it. And I think it'll actually be fun.
Now, the other day on your podcast, you shared a story of the late Gary Moeller, who just passed away a few days ago. Former Michigan head coach, former Lions coach for a little bit as well. It was a really interesting story that he with two head coaches in the building at the same time and all that. So why don't you share that story with our audience here? After he died a few days ago.
Yeah, everybody's written some really nice things about Gary. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I knew him or that I had a lot of interaction with him. But back in 2000. And I was, helping our staff cover the team at WDFN at the time for the Lions. They were still at the Silverdome. And, Gary Moeller took over as interim coach for the remainder of the season. He had a few years on his contract left as an assistant head coach and linebackers coach. So he was the interim head coach for that season, but he had more years left on his contract. Regardless, the team was not bad. They were actually, I believe it was 5-4 when Bobby Ross out of nowhere decided to resign. He was done. He had had enough. And I'm pretty sure Barry was gone at that point and had decided to retire himself. And I think Ross was run down and getting up there in age. And even though the team was in the playoff race at 5-4, he steps down. So they give the job to Gary Moeller, who wasn't a coordinator at the time, but like I said, assistant head coach and linebackers coach. And of course, Gary Moeller lost his job at Michigan, and there was that whole thing with that off the field episode that took place. And that was unfortunately a stain on his career, but he was a great guy and everybody loved him. So he takes over the Lions, and they actually go 4-2 in their next 6 games. So they're sitting at 4-4. They're sitting at 9-6 with 1 game to go. The 4-11 Bears are coming to town. And if the Lions can win at home, they're going to the playoffs as a wild card. Of course, as we know, they haven't won the division since 1993. At that time, it was like, it's only been 6 years. Now it's been how many? My math, Noah, this early in the morning isn't good. But so they're playing the Bears, and like they're playing tight the whole game. They're not, you could just tell, I was there, you can just tell it was going to come down to the wire. They couldn't put this 4-11 Chicago team away. They get inside the red zone. All they had to do is score a touchdown. They take the lead. They're down 20-17. They have to settle for a Jason Hanson like chip shot 26-yard field goal. And they tie the game at 20, which, okay, that's fine. Now they got to get a stop. And Noah, as you know, a historian of Lions football that you are, the Lions don't get stops in a situation like this. Here come the Bears. They go marching down the field. They get to like the 37-yard line, and the Lions actually get the third down stop. And the Bears are forced to kick a field goal with no time left from 54 yards out, and none other than Paul Edinger, who was a rookie at the time from Michigan State, drills the field goal, and the Lions lose. And now the question is, would Gary Moeller be back? And a lot of questions in the postgame. Gary, do you think you've earned the right to the job? You guys are on the precipice of the playoffs. You gag it away. And no one knew at the time that behind the scenes, Bill Ford Jr. whispering in his dad's ear, we need to go get a general manager. What about Matt Millen? Matt Millen was just a broadcaster. And the Ford men, and that's important to say because the women in the family, obviously Mrs. Ford and Sheila and all them, they weren't involved. They were in the room, but they were in the back of the room. Now they're in the front of the room, and the roles are reversed. Bill's nowhere to be found. But they hire Millen, and the first order of business is he's trying to find a coach. Meantime, Gary Moeller is still the head coach. Like, he's still under contract. He's still in the building at the Silverdome. And the day that Millen interviewed Marty Morningwig, I remember this, Gary Moeller was still in the building. Like, he was around. So, and I said this on the podcast on Locked On Lions, that building, it's not like now where if you're in Allen Park, you can kind of stay in your office, stay away, not have to interact with a lot of people. It's such a huge facility. The Silverdome, the area where coaches went to get coffee, where media went to get coffee, the kitchen area was kind of shared. The lobby where they did press conferences when Wayne Fonts was fired, that lobby where Bobby Ross was hired, that was the lobby, but it was also the press conference area or room. So you could walk by and see people. So the story goes that Millen's interviewing Morningwig, walking around the building, and they walk right by Gary freaking Moeller. Why didn't Millen tell Gary, stay home today? Don't come in. I got someone coming in, And Gary took it in stride and could not have been a more professional person about it, and was in the building when his successor, who was a epic failure, Marty Morningwig, was being pranced around the building, and they got him a contract offer that day, and they kept him away from Cleveland because he was supposed to interview with the Browns the next day and just slide down from Detroit to Cleveland. Noah, you know that route like the back of your hand. And they kept him there, and Moeller was let go, and that was it. But he stayed classy to the end about that, because how would you like it if you're in the building, you're walking around, and, there's the guy that might take my job. You just happen to bump into him. So that's my Gary Moeller story. What a classy dude, because he never told that story. He never went public and said, geez, they could have told me to stay home. They did. He never did. He took the high road.
I think that's just another example of some of the older Fords just being inept. And, where's the lack of professionalism there? Having that guy in the building still, when Matt Millen is showing Morningwig around, I think that's incredible. And I'm glad you're able to share that, Matt, because I feel like that's a story that not many people really know. So that's awesome.
I mean, I don't know. But blaming the Fords is easy, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of a culture thing and a lack of awareness, I guess, in that instance, because Gary had put in his time on Ross's staff, and I'm sure was hopeful that he could get an opportunity. Maybe the best move was that day to dial him up on the phone the night before or even the day before and go, hey, tomorrow, don't even come into the office. We got something we're doing, or something, or level with him, but he was there.
Another thing I think people forget about with Moeller is that his staff was the first ones to recruit Tom Brady at Michigan. Remember, because they had him, and then remember he was thinking about transferring and all that, because once Lloyd Carr and his crew came in, the guys who recruited him left. So, that's what I think of Gary Moeller when it comes to some Michigan stuff as well. But I want to shift gears now to across the street from Ford Field, Comerica Park, where the Tigers play, of course. Lost 4-0 to your Cleveland team yesterday. They're in Cleveland right now for a 4-game series, and it's dreadful, absolutely dreadful this season. You'd think 78 wins last year. They're rising. Their stock is rising. A.J. Hinch in his second year. But it's really been a complete disaster. And we've talked about it before. Al Avila showing signs of ineptitude, trading for Austin Meadows and getting nothing, basically nothing. Isaac Paredes shining with the Rays. Other guys like Torkelson really struggling. Young guys, Baez, who they invested a ton of money in, has not performed. Is there any future with this team right now? Because it just seems like Al Avila, has not been able to steer this ship after 7 years. And who knows about A.J. Hinch, if he's even going to stay or not because of this.
Well, I mean, the Tigers have tried to squash these reports, and that's what they are. The Detroit News is the ones that first came out and said that A.J. Hinch had this opt-out. I think something's fishy. You want A.J. Hinch here because he is a good manager. I don't think he's done a very good job this year, but again, he's been dealt an interesting hand with the pitching staff, and they're doing the best they can. I think Chris Fetter from obviously University of Michigan and the pitching coach has done all he can do. I mean, my goodness, the amount of arms that they've lost in the starting rotation. With that being said, the pitching isn't a huge problem. Last night's game was, and so you and I are recording this on Friday, so Thursday's game was kind of the kind of the blueprint, really, of what's gone on this year. Elvin Rodriguez isn't very good, but he kept them in the game. I mean, they were in the game. I mean, he could have given up 8 or 9 runs. Cleveland left a ton of runners on base, but the pitching really wasn't a huge issue last night. They lost 4-0. It was the offense. And the offense has been dreadful. And you mentioned Al Avila, and they were facing a really good pitcher in Tristan McKenzie. He's been really good lately and is solid. He seems to have very good success against Detroit. But I don't understand the direction they're going. The owner getting up there a few weeks ago at the Red Wing press conference and being asked about the Tiger rebuild and saying, even though the start hasn't been good, I still like the progress we've made. I don't see any progress. Not when you have this record and when you're this many games under 500. And you're right, Noah, what's the future? How many of these young players, not named Riley Green, are you going to count on next year and beyond? I think Riley Green is phenomenal. I think he's going to be really good. Not saying he's going to be great yet. Unlike other Detroit media members, I'm not going to dub him the next Al Kaline, Alan Trammell, or Lou Whitaker. Let's slow down. He looks nice. He looks good. But I'm not ready to call him a superstar yet. I think he's got a ton of potential. But other than that, you're right. Torkelson's been a bust. And I feel sorry for that kid. How has he not been sent down? Max Scherzer was once sent to the minors by the Tigers just to right the ship, just to have some success, feel good about yourself. Then you come back up. Andres Jimenez is an all-star now for Cleveland. Last year, he was sent down. He was 22 and struggling. They sent him down. He could see the ball go into the outfield. He could see a line drive drop. Then he comes back up. That's what you do with Torkelson. Every other organization would send him down just to give him a little breather. Tigers don't do it. He's there every day in that lineup, striking out, popping out. That's just a poor job by management. I can't believe Avila's still employed, and I can't believe they're gonna have a draft. The draft's coming up, and he's gonna run another draft. He's failed, so you're gonna have him fail another one whenever it just. And the fans like you and others, the Tigers have a really good fan base. They have a bigger and better fan base than my favorite team. They just do, and they're having to sit and watch this in a year, Noah, where the division is just terrible and is there for the taking for any of those teams. Not named, Minnesota, I guess. They're in first now, but if the White Sox played any better, they'd be there. The Guardians are really young. They've had their share of downs, but they're there. Tigers and Royals. And the division is right there for anybody to grab. And for the pronouncements before the season that the rebuild is over, sure doesn't look like it.
You talk about the player development. I know we talked about it for a long time that the Tigers have not had great player development over the years. And I think it's evident right now with some of these other guys, Torkelson among others. But I do want to ask you, speaking of those guys, do you think the Tigers rushed it a little bit with them? Trying to get them up and instead of developing them, more in the minors, you're saying, hey, we got to really rely on Torkelson, and even guys like Casey Mize and Matt Manning who are hurt right now. Looks like Casey Mize. I think they said he's going to have Tommy John surgery. Do you think the Tigers are rushing these guys, or should they have been more patient?
The problem is because they have not developed enough players to put in front of them, they're forced to rush them. If Riley Green they deemed wasn't ready, he wouldn't be up. I think he's ready. I think he's the exception. But a guy like Torkelson, let's say the Tigers decide to send him down. Who's going to play first base? They don't have anybody else. And that's on them. You got to make a minor trade here or there, a move in the offseason that maybe isn't a big name move or isn't a big headline move. And then all of a sudden that player turns out. The amount of good trades that Minnesota has made, smart signings, under the radar signings that Rick Hahn and the White Sox have made. Some of the players that the White Sox have developed and found in the Dominican in their program that have moved up. Obviously, the Chris Sale trade netted them Moncada, stuff like that. Even Kansas City, good drafting, a signing here or there. Look, the Royals are not very good, and they've got their own issues now. Half their team is obviously unvaccinated and not able to play in Toronto, and that got some bad headlines, but they at least have some young pieces there. Pasquantino, Witt, Nick Pratto, that are ready to come up. Their pitching just has been atrocious. So those are the kind of moves Cleveland to, trading Lindor and getting an all-star back in Jimenez that they've developed over the last 2 years has been something to watch. Jose Ramirez was homegrown and has developed. Who is that for the Tigers? And they don't have it. So they have to. Mize and Manning have been rushed because they haven't been able to, have enough guys and enough organizational depth to cover those spots and go, hey, we don't need to rush Casey Mize because we drafted this guy here 2-3 years earlier, or we traded all those trades, Verlander, Upton, Castellanos. What did that net? Nothing. So that's what's disappointing. I've been following, kind of the Cleveland farm system for a couple years now, just because I've interned at some of the other teams and everything. And I have noticed that Cleveland does do a lot better job, in my opinion, with developing their prospects. And you see a lot more of those guys in the big leagues now having more success than the Tigers. And I think that really speaks to maybe how Dombrowski did business back in the day, more signing these big name free agents, not really putting as much emphasis on the farm system. And I think that's just kind of carrying over with Al. I know he's had a lot of those high draft picks, but why wouldn't you pick Torkelson? Why wouldn't you pick Green? There's nothing against that. Those are obvious picks. So, I wouldn't say he's drafted really well, by any means, just happens to have no-brainer picks, that have fallen into his lap. But we'll see what happens with this draft. I know last year there was a lot of criticism with them picking Jackson Jobe over that other shortstop, the Red Sox guy. I cannot remember his name, but Marcelo Meyer. Yeah,
that's him. Yep. But we'll have to see for this draft coming up really soon as well. All right, I want to switch gears to the other Ilitch team, the Red Wings. Also, this is Matt Dery talking with us, host of the Locked On Lions podcast and Pistons team podcast. We've talked about it a little bit. The new ESPN documentary with them, Unrivaled, talks about their rivalry with the Avalanche in the mid to late 90s. You were actually there at the Joe on March 26th, 1997. Yeah. Which I didn't realize that because you were at the Malice at the Palace as well. You've been at some of the best moments in recent Detroit sports history.
No doubt.
What did you think of that documentary? And throwing you, I'm sure it threw you back to those great years of the Wings in the 90s.
I liked it a lot. I think E60 and ESPN did a really good job. Actually, I enjoyed watching it and kind of reliving some of those moments. The rivalry was incredible. And you don't really see that anymore. I think that, people are getting a little bit excited again about the Wings and the free agency and the draft and everything. Steve Yzerman certainly being at the head of the snake is exciting to many, but nothing will ever rival what that was. Noah, you're a sports talk radio listener, and certainly if you put today's 97 Won the Ticket back then, that's all they would have been talking about. It's what WDFN, when I was there, it was Stoney Wojo and Jamie and all these people. They talked Wings a lot. And it was, free agency was, oh my gosh, free agency starting. And that's all we talked about. And the lines lit up, the phone lines lit up. People called, people talked about it. We were kind of figuring out who's at the airport, who's in a limo, what rumors we heard, what our experts and insiders were hearing. And it was hockey town for real. And I'm not judging everything on sports talk radio, but it's a big measuring stick. Now it's not the case anymore. And a lot of that stemmed from Wings Avs going back from 95, 96, 97. And, for that span and that stretch with that Colorado team, with the guys you hated like Keene and Ricci with the hair and guys you respected like Sakic. And then they hated McCarty. They hated Vernon and Osgood and Shanahan. And it was Vladdy Konstantinov. It was incredible. I mean, that E60 kind of painted a great picture of it. They really did. They interviewed all the right people. The McCarty thing with Claude, the story about Shanahan and Claude. I mean, that was awesome stuff that no one and I didn't know. And it just brought you back to when this town was enamored with this hockey team. I used to tell people, Aaron Ward was a friend of the radio station back then. He was probably the, seventh or eighth defenseman. That guy could go into Royal Oak and get mobbed by fans for autographs and pictures. That was Aaron Ward. Imagine what Nick Lidstrom got, or Stevie got, or Shanahan, or even Fedorov. Those were great, great teams, and it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
One of the things in the documentary that I thought was interesting was just how much buildup it was to that game. I mean, everyone kind of knew something was going to happen. All that security, extra security was brought to the Joe and all that. And they mentioned briefly, I think about how maybe, I don't know if it was you guys or another radio station, but someone would call the team hotel and try to get these guys out of bed early in the morning or something like that. Is that true?
I think fans were prank calling, trying to pull fire alarms. I think they stayed back then at the Marriott downtown and the Rensen, and I think fans just knew, and there were all sorts of games that were being played. I think that the one guy that I think on that documentary kind of hammed it up a little bit was that trainer for the Avalanche, the guy with the goatee. I think he was hamming it up a bit, we were worried for our lives. I don't remember that. I knew it was going to be intense. You knew something was going to happen. You had a feeling. Wojo at the time, Bob was writing for the News still, and still is, but his column legitimately did say, hey, it's time for payback. It's time for retribution. And that was discussed. The game itself was just wild and incredible that Darren was the one that scored the overtime goal. I remember us on DFN the next day playing the KKFN, that was the Denver radio station's radio call of when McCarty scores, and the Avalanche play-by-play guy says, oh no, not McCarty, anybody but him. When he scores the winning goal, it was incredible. It really was.
Great memories, and hopefully the Wings can get back to those old memories as well. But those rivalries, it's not the same anymore. Like you said, you don't see that, and really in sports in general, it's a lot more friendly competition, I guess now.
No, there's no doubt. There's no doubt about it. And you watch the NBA a lot of times, and it's hugs. It's all a lot of hugs and high fives and fist bumps before games, and guys are friends, and guys are joint. Back then, nobody on the Wings would have ever signed with the Avs, and vice versa. You didn't want, and it went on for years. And the teams were both very good too, so that helped.
I guess when you saw LeBron punch Isaiah Stewart in the face a couple years ago with the Pistons, that's the closest to the bad blood. I guess. I don't know. I don't know if that was anything close to what Wings Avs was. That was nuts. That was crazy. Not at all. For sure. So last team we got before we head out, Pistons, of course. You host the Pistons team podcast. They just had a draft, and Troy Weaver picking up making some trades, picking Jaden Ivey. It looks like he's a little bit banged up in summer ball, but he says he's okay, according to a report yesterday. What do you make of this draft? And is Troy Weaver a guy that you see really, building the foundation of this team and could potentially compete for the playoffs? I don't know about this year, but maybe next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think he wants to win right now, and I think even though it's going to be year 3 of the restoration, as they call it, the restore, and I love that they have the T-shirts printed, and even Jaden Ivey's mom, Nielle at Summer League, was wearing a Pistons shirt that said "Restore." That's cool. I like that they've got that as sort of a backdrop for what they're doing. And Troy Weaver, just like I said with the Lions, if he's given an opportunity to just stay in his lane, don't mess with him, let him do his thing, I think he's going to have success. He has tinkered with the roster more than any GM that I've ever seen. Trades and signings and trying this. He's trying everything. But what he's trying to do is build a core around Cade Cunningham that does kind of go back to the old days, a little bit of toughness and grit, the going to work teams of the 2000s, the bad boys of the 80s and 90s. With talent too, you got to have talent. Cade Cunningham is a talent. It's not about grit and grime. Yeah, he's tough, but he's really talented, and so is Jaden Ivey. To find a way to free up some money, get Jeremy Grant off the books, then acquire a first-round pick, then utilize that first-round pick to move up in this draft to get a guy like Jalen Duren, who is a much-needed shot blocker and rim protector and athlete at the rim, was really a great move. Not easy to move up in the mid-first rounds of the draft and get leapfrog teams and everything else. They still have a few more needs, still need some more shooting. But I like the direction they're going. And I like that Dwayne Casey's the guy at the top that is a great almost father figure for some of these players to teach them. And the East is getting tough. That's the thing, Noah, you mentioned. Playoffs this year, I don't know. If Durant and Kyrie somehow stay in Brooklyn, and the way some of these other teams have gotten a lot better and have moved up past, not that they were behind the Pistons before, but the way they've improved, the Eastern Conference is as good as it's been. So it's going to be difficult to make the playoffs, but a goal of let's get to 10. Let's play in that play-in tournament. I don't think would be a bad goal to set, but it's still going to take a little time, and they're still very, very young. You still have to have some veterans. They do have some, but they're still very young.
Always good to catch up with Matt Dery, host of the Locked On Lions podcast and, of course, the Pistons team podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Dery Speaks, Dery Speaks, and the Matt Dery Facebook fan page.
Oh, yes.
As well.
You are a Locked On Lions listener. That's my I think I repeat myself a little bit too much, Noah, but great talking to you, my friend. Continued success. You are doing great, and always love talking Detroit sports with you. So anytime you need me, you got my number. So
you're the best, and I'm glad you were able to come on for a very special 100th edition.
Yes.
Of Open Mic Night. Started 2 years ago with John Macaroon, and really, really happy that I was able to come on, or I was able to start it up, and then you were able to help me out as well, and get on for a couple episodes.
All right, Noah. Thank you so much.